Well, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm Chad Stebbins from the Institute of International Studies, and thank you for coming, and thank you for those who are watching on Zoom this morning. This is our busiest week of the Canada semester, 9 total events. We have 3 today, 4 tomorrow, and 2 on Thursday. So we have presentations this morning at 9:30 and 11, and there's a film tonight at 7 in Cornell Auditorium in Plaster Hall, Bon Cop, Bad Cop, which the Canadian Consulate General's Office is going to introduce and host a talk-back session afterwards. So consider coming to that. I'd like to introduce Thursday's speaker at 11 a.m. This is Earl Provost from Ontario, Toronto. He's going to be telling you about Amazing Ontario, 11 a.m. Thursday in this space, and his assistant Carson Markley, who has been to Joplin before. So today's speaker, and also at 11, is Colleen Duke, who's a longtime friend of Missouri Southern. We did a Canada semester 15 years ago, and Colleen was instrumental in providing some of the programming. She is a Senior Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Services Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago. Her areas of focus include academic and cultural relations, public affairs, communications and digital media, agriculture policy, security and defense, and human rights issues, which is going to be part of the focus of this morning's presentation. Prior to joining Global Affairs Canada, Colleen worked at a number of museums in Chicago and Washington, D.C. She has a BA in Art History and Economics from the University of Chicago and an MBA from Northwestern University. So please join me in welcoming Colleen Duke back to Missouri Southern.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning, and it is good to be back. That description makes me sound so impressive. So I know a little bit about a whole lot of things, and I'll be sharing a lot of that with you today. So you may have guessed from my resume that I am not Canadian. I am an American who works for Canada, and I've been working for the consulate for, I'm not telling you how long. It's been a long time. I've stayed because it's a fascinating job. We'll be doing a session tomorrow called So You Want to Be a Diplomat, with all of us talking about our career paths, because we all come from very different backgrounds and do different things. So if you're curious why there's a couple of Americans working for Canada, Carson's also American, we will give you some background along with our diplomats on how we got doing what we do. So. Because I am American and grew up in New England, I was taught nothing about Canada. Canada was one of those places where you look at the national weather map and it was like grayed out, like there's no weather in Canada, or the Alberta Clippers come down when it gets to 20 below Fahrenheit. So like bad weather comes from Canada, and that was kind of about it. You know, moose, mountie, maples, mountains. So I like to start all of my presentations with, I don't know what, oh, there we go. I always start with a map. I like this one because the United States is at the bottom and you don't often see that. So just to tell you a little bit about my bosses and who I work for. So Canada's population is, as of actually last month, 41 million. When I started working for Canada a couple decades ago, it was 30 million. It's grown very quickly recently, mostly due to immigration coming in. So a lot more bosses that I have to be responsible to. The GDP in US dollars is 2.5 trillion last year. By landmass, second largest country in the world after Russia, second to the United States. But the vast majority of those 41 million people do live within about 100, 150 miles of the border. A couple of reasons for that. One is climate. It's kind of cold in the north. There will be a Zoom lecture with our Alberta rep, who is embedded within the U.S. office. He's from Edmonton, so he can tell you a little bit about what it's like to live in the northern climes, because it's cold up there. The other reason why many Canadians live close to the border is because of the relationship with the United States, the trade relationship, which we'll be touching on today. Unlike the United States, Canada is a constitutional monarchy. So once again, that was something I didn't learn in school. So here you go. There's a parliament. There's members of parliament representing different districts or ridings, as they're called. The highest number from each individual party, that the leader of that party will be the prime minister. So currently it's Justin Trudeau because he's the leader of the Liberal Party. There's 3 other major parties and a bunch of smaller parties. So the prime minister is the head of government, but the head of state is actually the British monarch. So I almost defaulted to the Queen because she was the monarch for a long time, but now it's King Charles. So in the United States, the president is the head of government and the head of state. It's separated in Canada as is in many other countries. So not only do you have your prime minister, but you also have your governor general. That is the king's representative in Canada and does a lot of the ceremonial work, the accepting of new ambassadors, the giving awards to citizens recognizing extraordinary deeds. The governor general is responsible when Parliament does fall and we go into election season. There's a role for the governor general there. Our governor general, Mary Simon, currently is Indigenous. If you're hanging around for my second lecture, you'll hear more about her. I'll be speaking on Indigenous Canada and the relationship between the government and the Indigenous people of the country. 2 official languages, English and French. It makes for interesting relations. All of our signs in our office, even though we're in downtown Chicago, are in 2 languages. I do not speak French. I took it in high school and middle school, and it just didn't stick. Many of my colleagues are bilingual. Some are French originally, and it really helps us with doing things like social media, which all has to be done in 2 languages. All of our Canadians are bilingual and required to be so. And then the capital of Canada, anyone? When I was prepping for my interview initially, I asked myself that like on the bus and I got it wrong. Anyone want to take a guess? Earl, what's the capital of Canada? Ottawa, of course. I thought it was Toronto originally, so. Be sure to stick around for his talk on Thursday. He'll share some interesting facts. So there you go. I work for the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago. Across the United States, we have an embassy in Washington. We have 12 consulates, and there's 3 trade offices. This is a massive footprint in the U.S. Embassies are always in capital cities. So we don't, in the consulate, we don't really report to Washington. We report to headquarters in Ottawa. We do all coordinate together, and we do take some lead from the ambassador. But we are scattered across the country. We each have a territory. And then the 3 trade offices are open to focus primarily on trade, usually in burgeoning areas where they need more presence on the ground to cover Canadian businesses, US-Canada trade. So we have the embassy in the Midwest. We work very closely with our colleagues in Minneapolis and Detroit around Great Lakes issues, Midwestern issues. As you know, the United States is very regionalized, and there's different priority issues depending on where you are in the US. Our San Francisco team is working with Silicon Valley a lot, and they have more staff working in trade there than we would have in, say, Atlanta. The roles of the consulate, because most people are like, what do you do? And you heard my very long list of files. So it basically breaks down into 4 major sections. So our biggest section in Chicago is the trade section. So we're not just facilitating trading. I'm going to use the old economics term of widgets. We're not just selling widgets to one another. We're looking at market opportunities. We're looking at growing different sectors. So in Chicago, we have someone who is focused on food and beverage industry. We have someone that's focused on infrastructure. We have someone that does aerospace. We have people who are focused on the investment sector and fintech, financial. You can tell I don't work in trade. I hear fintech all the time. A lot of financial things. We also are working with people who are looking to invest in Canada, bring money up to Canada, bring jobs up to Canada, whether it's opening a call center, expanding their business. So we don't, in a nutshell, we don't do the deal. We kind of put the right people together and we facilitate these transactions that expand prosperity and jobs on both sides of the border. Really our most important section, but not the largest, small and mighty, is our consular section. So our consular officers are there to help Canadians living in the area, Canadians visiting the area, or Canadians in distress. And sometimes those cross. So, for example, some Canadian expats are living in the US, they have a child, and they want to make sure that they have all the paperwork because that child is born in the United States, so American, but also Canadian. So they'll help facilitate that. Someone comes in for a business trip, Lollapalooza, and loses their passport. The most common way to lose your passport is to leave it in the pocket of the plane. So if you're traveling with your passport, please don't put it there because I have to do that post on social media on a regular basis. Everyone does that. So if someone loses their passport, they're abroad, they come into our office, they meet with our consular team, and they work to get them a temporary passport to get them home. Canadians in distress. This can be many different things, not just losing your passport. Someone could be the victim of a crime, and then they'll work with that person to help make sure that all the systems and all their rights are upheld. Sometimes Canadians do bad things in the United States and are incarcerated. And so once again, we do not provide legal services, we don't help out with any of that, but we make sure that their rights are upheld and they have the representation they need. And then we keep track of what's going on with them in our various states. We also, and I should mention this, we have within our office, so sort of working parallel with us, are two provincial offices. Ontario is one, Alberta is the other. Quebec also has a provincial office in Chicago. They are a separate entity. So we work with them as well, but they're in a separate office up the street. They've been in Chicago over 50 years. Ontario's been in Chicago for how long now? Thank you. The pandemic made me lose track of time. I know, so that's my demarker for so many things in life these days. And then Alberta has been in Chicago for I think about a year and a half, 2 years. Thank you. So their territories are bigger than ours. I'm going to get to the consulate territory in a minute. They do have different issues that they work on, but when we can, we try to work together, which is why I am lucky enough to have Carson and Earl with me today. Okay, territories. That's what we have in Chicago. And my standard joke, American, is that this is a territory only a Canadian would come up with. It is way far north, not quite touching Canada. Even my colleagues are like, oh, well, you have a border. I'm like, we don't actually have a border because of how Minnesota and the UP work. So we're way far to the north, the Northwoods, and then we're way far south to southern Missouri. So it's very unusual, very different issues in all three states, which keeps it fun. I think we have the fewest number of states than any other consulate. In New England, they have pretty much all of New England. In the South, like Atlanta has the Carolinas, so they're dealing with working with any Canadians in distress with what's going on in Asheville right now. Miami has Miami, a couple other states, and I believe like the Bahamas. There's two in California, but we just have three, but all with very different relationships with Canada to a degree, very different portfolios, very different businesses, and it keeps it interesting. It also makes travel really hard because it's like really north-south. I think we should have Indiana, but you know, I'll have to bring that up to the Prime Minister. I don't know. Carson, you were in Detroit before you were here. You think they'd give up Indiana to us? It makes so much sense. Okay, here we go. So why so many offices in the US? Well, the Canada-US relationship is unique in the world. For over 150 years, Canada has had no closer friend or ally than the United States. And at home and abroad, we work together to make all our citizens' lives safer and more prosperous. And it starts with three main factors. One is shared values. I always tell people Canada and the US are actually very different, but in very small ways. Again, coming at it when I was new, I thought Canada, it's kind of just like the United States, and there's all sorts of terrible jokes about Canada being the 51st state. And we do have many things in common, but the longer you spend in this job or in Canada, you see the small differences. But the commonalities bring us together, and that's what makes this unique. Shared values is a big one. We both believe in democracy. We both believe in human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of association, assembly. We believe in the rule of law. So we have courts, we have rules that everyone follows. The shared values allow us to have this close relationship with fewer conflicts with other countries, and then we focus on not only our commonalities and working together for our citizens, but also the sort of speed bumps in the relationship are a lot lower. And the reason why you don't hear, this is my take, the reason why you don't hear a lot about the Canada-US relationship, it's massive and it goes on daily. You're going to see some of the numbers. It just runs smoothly. We're very well integrated. We work together extremely well. The time it comes up, and when my new Canadian diplomats come in and they're like, we should be in the papers all the time. And it's like, the only time we're really in the papers is when there's a problem. We don't want to be in the papers. We'd rather it to go smoothly, quietly, working together. Because the times it comes up in the papers when there's a problem at the border and there's a 10-mile backup of trucks, or mad cow disease, if anyone remembers mad cow disease, that was an issue. So it's not good when we're in the paper. So. We're allies. We've been allies for a long time, not only working together to defend North America, but also globally, working on global peace and security. We collaborate on law enforcement at the border, and we share information tracking threats. One of my most favorite examples of working together at the border, not only border enforcement, the transit back and forth, but in Detroit, there is a collaborative program between the US Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard. And they actually have the rights, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. Carson might. We'll both marinate on that one. Has a cute name. But there's an agreement between both Coast Guards that they can get on each other's ships to pursue someone who may be fleeing. So say someone has a boatload of guns and they leave Ohio, not to pick on Ohio, and make a run across Lake Erie. Technically, the US Coast Guard would have to stop at the water border, and then the Canadians pick it up. But because of this agreement, Shiprider is the name of it. They are allowed to cross the border, or they can hop onto each other's ships to pursue, because we're trying to keep both countries safe. So this is a very unique program in the world, and it works quite well, especially in the Great Lakes, where we do have this water border that we're trying to secure. At home and abroad, Canada's military is interoperable with the US military. Because my world is focused on Canada and the United States, I know that we have Canadian service men and women who are located at US bases across Illinois and Missouri. And then US servicemen also come up to Canada. So they train together, they work together, they take positions on each side of the border. Same with border security. The customs folks, at many airports in Canada, you pre-clear customs before you even get on the plane. So you don't have to go through customs in the United States. Those are US officers that are posted in Canada, and they're just the same as the folks here, but they live up there, so you can do customs in Montreal or Toronto or in Vancouver, and they're posted there like you would say if you work for the State Department. and apparently they really like it up there. I've had a couple of conversations with the U.S. Customs people who are posted to see what it's like. We work together in the global fight against terrorism. So Canada was working with the U.S. in Afghanistan. We worked together securing the border, sharing border intelligence to make sure that people aren't getting in that should not be here or there. One of our greatest examples of this collaborative relationship is NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, also known as the folks who track Santa on Christmas Eve. I'm a big fan of that. They celebrated their 65th anniversary in 2023. So NORAD is co-commanded by a U.S. commander and a Canadian commander. They're in Colorado. And actually, it was NORAD on 9/11 that shut down North American airspace. But what is not known is that the U.S. commander was not there that day. And it was the Canadian commander who was in charge and made that decision to secure airspace, which was a tough decision to make. As a result, they have a new command center in Colorado Springs, and it's actually named after the Canadian commander. It's the only non-U.S. commander that a government base or a government building is named after because of what the commander did that day. Canada has fought with the U.S. In both the world wars. We worked together in the Cold War, Korea, the Balkans, the Middle East. I can go on and on. I mentioned that we work together with defense, but also tracking down and detaining illegal narcotics. We give humanitarian relief and disaster relief. After Hurricane Katrina, the Canadian military went down to New Orleans to help relief efforts. Not sure what's going to happen with what we're watching with Hurricane Helene in Carolinas, but I know that Canadian linemen are always ready to go. We also have firefighters for the forest fires that cross the border, and we help each other out. Neighbors, I've talked about a lot about our neighborliness. So our border, the Canadian-US border, is the world's longest international border. It's over 5,500 miles long. Canadian law enforcement agencies use ground sensors, cameras, radar, license plate readers to monitor the border, as do we in the United States, to try to keep it safe. We work together on our ports of entry. We collaborate with the information sharing. We have the law enforcement working together. We screen all foreign visitors. Almost all visitors have to have a visa, a permit, or electronic travel authorization to get on a plane traveling to or transiting through Canada. So there's a good entry-exit system to keep track of who's coming in and out, and the biometrics have kicked in the last few years. Canadian Border Service Agency officers are also working on the front line for pirating counterfeit and pirated goods, which there's a big problem with that, along with the narcotics and the opioids. And they can inspect and destroy suspicious packages. Again, sharing that intelligence with the United States so we can work together. And our border infrastructure keeps our country secure. We do work together because we don't think of it as a border with each other. We think of it more as a perimeter border around our two countries, that we work together to just keep it out of these two North American countries, so we have to worry about less that might be crossing the US-Canada border. There are programs that help facilitate travel for US citizens that are cleared. There's pre-clearance with programs such as Nexus, which if you have a Nexus card, you apply for that through the US government. If you're going to the border, if you're crossing frequently, it's a card that helps you take sort of a fast pass lane through because you've been pre-secured. Sort of like Global Entry is here, the Trusted Traveler is here. If you have TSA PreCheck, you go through a process to be pre-checked. There's also one, and it's just Canada-US, to help facilitate that back and forth. Because in places like Detroit, you're living cross-border. You might pop over for groceries or for a hockey game or meet up with friends. And we try to, for people who can be verified, and we can give these mechanisms to help facilitate these relationships because we are neighbors, and in many cases, there's family living on both sides of the border. So I made a note. I mentioned pre-clearance, how when you're flying back from Canada, often in the bigger airports, you clear U.S. Customs before you even get on the plane to come back. And it keeps expanding because there's a downtown airport in Toronto. If anyone goes to Toronto, great city. They have a little lakefront airport that's fantastic. You can fly nonstop from Chicago there, and they just announced that pre-clearance is coming there in a year, which is amazing because it's like a $5 cab ride to downtown Chicago. Also, there's 7,000 trucks that cross the border just through Detroit every day, and we're examining those, we're clearing those, we're using different systems to look to see what's in there to help facilitate that travel. And then finally, in Detroit, Carson, I should just have you up here doing this. Detroit is the largest crossing point between the Canada-US border, and there is a brand new bridge that is a long story in itself. It's called the Gordie Howe Bridge. For those of you that don't know hockey, it's a Canadian player who played for the Detroit Red Wings, beloved on both sides of the border. So this is the first new border crossing between Detroit and Windsor in I don't even know how long, but that the Ambassador Bridge was built in the 20s, the tunnel probably in the 50s or the 60s, I'm guessing. So it will not only facilitate cross-border travel, but it's going to enhance reliability and security as state-of-the-art clearance mechanisms are going in. I used to have a consul general give a whole lecture on this called How to Build a Bridge, because building the Gordie Howe Bridge and getting there was quite a journey. The Ambassador Bridge is owned by one person, and he didn't want it. I don't know what that is. So anyway, coming soon, new bridge. Okay, I'm talking a lot about movement and trade. So we do have the largest trading relationship in the world. Every day, 400,000 people and $2.7 billion in goods and services cross the border every single day. Canada is America's biggest customer by far, and our economic relationship supports millions of good-paying jobs across every congressional district in the United States. Our supply chains and our economies are fully integrated, probably to a degree that you're not even aware. Canada buys more goods and services from the United States than they do from China, Japan, and Germany combined. So we're going to go into a little bit of a deep dive on this, and this graphic is not the greatest. It's a little complicated, but let me look at my notes because I broke some down for you. So the most important part of the visual is the dark blue states. Those are the states where Canada is the #1 export market, and you will note that includes Missouri. If it's light blue, Canada is #2 or 3. So I think there's maybe 2 states where Canada is not in the top 3. It's a $1 trillion trade and investment relationship. And as I mentioned, it supports millions of jobs in both countries. So whether it's direct foreign investment into each other's countries, the trade, the widgets going back and forth, or our integrated economies working together. Canada imports more from the US than any other country, and nearly half of the goods that the US buys from Canada are made from raw materials, sorry, let me flip that. Nearly half the goods the US buys from Canada are raw materials used by US manufacturers to produce whatever they're making. So it's creating jobs in the US and building North American competitiveness because we're just working with each other and it doesn't have to come in from other countries. Similarly, Canadian companies buy from US sources to make Canadian products. So a lot of this going back and forth all the time that you never really notice. And the Canada-US trade relationship is built on long-standing binational supply chains, where roughly 79% of Canada's exports to the United States are incorporated into the US supply chain. So the Canadian export market is deeply reliant on the US market and vice versa. If either one shuts down, we've had problems. The automotive industry is an excellent example. And I'm going to give Earl the microphone in a little bit and have him talk about what he does. But since he's from Ontario, I'm going to talk intelligently about the relationship in the auto and truck manufacturing. I'm going to give him the mic. But it is, again, highly integrated. There are parts of cars that will cross the border multiple times before the car is completed. Again, you never know that, you never see it, but these parts are going back and forth, whether it's a bolt that starts here and goes into something that goes in, I don't know, your seatbelt and then goes back and forth. It's just fascinating how integrated it is and how smoothly it works. And the factories in both countries do their specific components for specific vehicles and can hold up to just-in-time delivery because of the good movement across the border and the reliability of this relationship. You hear about it when things go sideways, which has happened. The Missouri relationship. Let's get local. So Canadian companies employ about 12,000 people in the state. And your top exports to Canada are trucks, aircraft and parts, chemicals, equipment, and machinery. I had a hard time drilling down into that to get some interesting and on the ground specifics. But I mean, these are sort of the basis of our contemporary life. I want to call attention. I think I have. Do I have an animation on here? I do not have an animation. Okay. But again, Canada is your top export market, and it is larger than Missouri's next 5 markets, which are Mexico, Japan, Germany, China, and Brazil combined. So this will give you a sense of scale on how important selling to Canada is to the state of Missouri. But you also buy things from Canada. So what do you buy? You buy oil, you buy engines, you buy plastics. Bottom line is Missouri sells more to Canada than it buys. So net profit for this state. Oil is always interesting and is the top of many states' lists. So I'm going to flip to the energy relationship. One of the many things I did not know was the scope and scale of our integrated energy relationship. Canadian energy is critical to the U.S. economy and competitiveness. It is the largest supplier of energy overall to the United States. So last year, Canada provided over half of the United States' crude oil imports, 100% of the electricity imports, that's mostly in the Northeast, 99% of the natural gas imports, and about a quarter of uranium, which is running your nuclear reactors. So overall, the United States, if you look at the numbers going in and out, what is exported and what is imported, the United States is energy independent, but we're a big country. There's lots of regions in the United States. So if there's a certain region or where you can't just pick up a refinery and move that, they want to be running at full capacity. So a lot of energy does come in and balances it out. There are over 70 oil and gas pipelines that cross the border and 35 transmission lines across the border. Again, a lot in the Northeast, where the electricity is coming down from primarily Quebec. It uses hydroelectricity. The oil and gas pipelines, a lot are coming through this part of the country. There's a lot of crude that goes down to Northwest Indiana. There's some that goes to the refineries outside of St. Louis. Massive, massive pipeline relationship. Canada has the 3rd largest crude oil reserves in the world. And Canadian oil is also among the most responsibly sourced in the world. Labor is treated right. The environment is treated right. But oil and gas can't be the whole relationship with climate change. And Canada is addressing climate change. There's an emissions reduction plan that's looking on reducing emissions from the sector by about 42% by the end of this decade. And there's also draft regulations that are aimed at reducing methane that are in the works. We're investing in Canada in new technologies and infrastructures to be a global leader in clean energy and innovation. And there's a whole lot of renewable energy. I mentioned hydro for electricity. The Canadian electricity grid is already 80% non-emitting, so clean, and Canada's looking to get to net zero by 2035. So whether or not you're aware, there's probably some Canadian gasoline in your tank. Came out of the ground, likely in Alberta, refined in the United States, and then into our gas stations in the region. So we're all tied together. But there's one other country to talk about. USMCA, also known as the new NAFTA, since it was renegotiated during the Trump administration. All three of our countries working together closely. We're all very dependent on one another and trade with one another, and we are a powerhouse in the world economically. So USMCA keeps duty-free trade within North America, keeps the prices down for consumers, keeps goods flowing, reinforces the supply chains, again, the movement between our three countries. And Joplin happens to be on the one train line that connects all three countries north to south. It's CPKC. There was just the merge with Canadian Pacific and Kansas Southern, and I know that there's a depot here in Joplin. I don't know if it's still active. I'm going to go search it out today, but the rail line does definitely go through your town, so you're a part of this. USMCA and the trade relationship also provides that certainty to businesses and workers that this relationship and the goods and services will flow, and allows us to work together as a bloc to compete with the rest of the world. It also helps keep wages high for all of us and to make sure that we all have better working conditions and standards of living. And then as an example, am I on time? I'm good. The integrated supply chain. So this is like my favorite graphic, and I keep asking them to make new ones. You heard that I work on ag, and it's ag policy. But something like this, it can demonstrate policy in many different ways, in a way that's really relatable to all of us, a hamburger. So you can see how our binational relationship brings that burger to your table, whether it's the tomatoes from the greenhouses in Ontario that we can get year-round, the grain from Alberta that goes to California and is made into the buns. We took this to Jefferson City earlier this year, and the head of the ag committee was like, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen." So I keep at them. I'm like, "Can you make me another? Can you make me another?" Because like burgers are good. We're trying to do some regional ones, and making the ag people in Ottawa do the research to make sure we can verify all of these products, because this has all been checked on where these things are coming from. So your mushrooms from British Columbia. And then I don't think there's Missouri on here. So there should be. I'm working on one for like a barbecue dinner that's binational, because quite a bit of livestock does cross the border. So they're born in the United States. They're shipped up to Canada to be raised and then come back to the United States to be processed. So it's again, that complicated relationship, but it works well for producers, for ranchers, for farmers, for the end users as well. Now, we used to have one on the auto industry, and it hasn't been updated in a long time, and I couldn't find the old one. But I mentioned that I am lucky enough to have Earl Provo in the audience, and I'm hoping I can ask him up here to speak a little bit about the integration of the auto industry in Detroit, Windsor, and the relationship of Ontario with the United States, because it's probably, I think, the biggest one of all the provinces to this country. So, Earl? Yes, please. And again, American, so I get it. Maps.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Do you have my slide deck already? Okay. It's all good. while we're waiting for that. So I'm a proud Canadian, but I work for Ontario and I'm from Ontario, so I have to say that Ontario is the best province within Canada. All the cool stuff happens there. So. Yes. Okay, well, so I am Ontario's political and economic representative in the Midwest United States. I'm co-located in the Canadian Consulate in Chicago. I'm from Toronto, but we have an office in the Canadian Consulate in Chicago. So my job is to be helpful. So, today there's some one-pagers on the Missouri-Ontario relationship on the table here. My name, phone number, and email are on those. So you can contact me anytime for anything that's Ontario or Canada, U.S. related. That pretty much sums up what my role is, to be helpful. So contact me anytime for anything. Okay. The two-way trade with so Colleen talked a lot about the Canada-U.S. relationship and the trade numbers. I'm going to focus specifically on the Ontario-Missouri relationship. So two-way trade between Ontario and Missouri is approximately $6.6 billion. That's in U.S. dollars, so it's like $4 trillion in Canadian dollars. And Ontario imports from Missouri approximately $4.5 billion in goods and products. So huge Ontario-Missouri relationship, and Missouri sells much more to Ontario than Ontario does in Missouri. But it's an important trading relationship, and part of my mandate is to build the political relationship with Missouri, between Ontario and Missouri. So being here today, when Colleen asked me if I wanted to be part of this and introduced me to Dr. Stebbins, I jumped at the opportunity to do that, because this is the kind of stuff I need to do, the kind of engagement I need to do to build on that Ontario-Missouri relationship. We have the deep economic relationship. We need to build on the political and stakeholder engagement component of that. So that is that's a big part of my mandate. So I was thrilled to be here. So I want to thank actually Dr. Stebbins for inviting me, and even after he spoke to me on a couple of Teams calls, he didn't cancel the invitation to participate. So I'm very grateful for that too. But the key companies that operate in Missouri, companies that operate in Ontario, are Anheuser-Busch, because they bought Labatt Breweries, I don't know, about a decade ago. It's been a while. Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I think we rented a car from Enterprise to be here. And then Express Scripts and H&R Block. But Ontario companies, key Ontario companies that operate in Missouri are Magna International, Reuters America, Waste Connections, Woodbridge Corporation, and Martin Ray International. But, Missouri has Missouri does a lot of things very well. So heavy manufacturing, skilled labor are two of the big reasons why, why Ontario and Missouri have such strong economic ties, and why there's an opportunity to build on that. So this is just sort of a quick presentation on what we do. So oops. There's more to it than just this, I promise. Here we go. Yeah, so what we do. So the Ontario government, so I'm new. My position as Agent General in the Midwest, operating out of Chicago, Canadian Consulate in Chicago, is a new office. So Premier Doug Ford, and I'll talk more about the Ontario government and its structure on Thursday, but today what I want to do is just talk about the Ontario-Missouri relationship and the trade component, sort of what we do as an office. So the Government of Ontario operates a network of 15 international trade and investment offices and Canadian diplomatic missions around the world. And there are 5 in the United States, in San Francisco, Dallas, New York, Washington, D.C., and our office in Chicago. And it's obvious that the Ontario office in Chicago is the best one. And so Dallas and Chicago are new offices and established. I was appointed in June 2019. I was reappointed in January 2022 because the Premier of Ontario thought the Americans hadn't suffered enough. So I was reappointed a few years ago, and I'm up for reappointment, and I suspect I will be in January 2025. So the office was open in early 2020, and again, as I said earlier, I am Ontario's political and economic representative in the Midwest and Great Lakes region, and the office has a broad mandate, and we work very closely with the Canadian government and the Canadian consulate in Chicago. And my job is to raise Ontario's profile and build commercial and political and economic relations in the Great Lakes and Midwest regions. So that's my territory in the light blue. So I have 12 states of responsibility. So even though I'm supposed to live in Chicago, I'm never there. Within that territory, the light blue states are 3 Canadian consulates: Detroit, Chicago, and Minneapolis. And the truth is that I'd like to think I've had some success in my role. There are 2 reasons for that. One, we've been able to have good, hard-working, close working relationships with the Canadian consulates in all 3 Canadian consulates in Detroit, Minneapolis, and Chicago. And also we joined the Chambers of Commerce in all the states. So the Missouri Chamber of Commerce is particularly helpful and constructive, and they're anxious to help me and Ontario build on our relationship with the state of Missouri and the key stakeholders and the key contacts. And, you know, I mean, COVID got in the way of the ambitious agenda, and then elections. Yeah, I should have shut this phone off. My apologies. And then elections in Ontario, midterms, and now the presidential election kind of got in the way of stuff. But in January 2025, we're very confident that we'll be able to pick up where we left off just a few years ago. So this is just building on what Colleen talked about earlier in terms of the trade numbers. So we are Missouri's #1 trading partner with Canada by far. Actually, those numbers change all the time. Again, those are in US dollars. So, you know, quadruple that and you might get the Canadian dollars. But those numbers change all the time. In a post-pandemic world, where you have choppy and unreliable supply chains with other parts of the world, you know, my focus has been on the North-South relationship, not just the political, but the economic, and building those economic ties, building on those stronger, those solid economic ties and relationships, and making them even stronger. So those numbers are a little out of date now, and I just did that map a year ago. So I'm confident, and the Ontario government is confident, that we'll be able to build on those Missouri numbers. So you see in the Great Lakes region, the dark blue states, we are the #1 trading partner. We are now Illinois' #1 trading partner too. Those numbers are a little off. And we actually have a big part of my mandate, is to establish economic MOUs with various states. So we have one with Michigan and Indiana and Illinois, and in November, the Premier and the Governor are going to sign one in Ohio in November. And that's been ready for signature for a long time, but COVID and elections and other things got in the way to really get that done. But the plan is to get that done in November. And then in January, we're going to start working with Missouri. When you have a new governor in place and elections are away and there's some political stability for a little while, then we're going to work on the Missouri relationship. Again, a big partner, a great partner in this has been the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, Canada's honorary consul general in Missouri, Sonette Magnus, and the consulate in Chicago. Because what's good for Missouri is good for Ontario and vice versa. What's good for Great Lakes region benefits all of us. And in the Great Lakes region, it's $128 billion, again, US dollars. And that's a conservative number in two-way trade for all the states in the Great Lakes region. So between Canada, or Ontario and the US. So that's a point worth noting. I am confident, the Ontario government is very confident that we'll be able to build on the trade numbers in all these states, but they're particularly excited about Missouri. Missouri does a lot of things very well, and a lot of talented people live here. So we're feeling good about what we can do in Missouri in the next, in January 2025. So I put this map in here because this is a map of the Canadian consulates throughout the United States. So you see the light blue, the light green, which is the Chicago consulate's territory. But I work with Detroit and Minneapolis as well. But you know, again, I've said this before. My job is to be helpful. So you contact me anytime for anything. I mean, I've got a great strategy. People contact me. I take Colleen's work and call it my own. It's a great plan. I just take credit for everyone else's work. But, you know, I hope that in the next few days you're going to find out that it's about layers and layers of support and different layers of contact. And once you've sort of tapped into that ecosystem of contacts, you've activated the whole network. And it's very easy for us to just talk to somebody and figure out how to move a file forward, how to move an idea forward, or a concern or an issue or a problem forward, and try and get the answers you need. So that we work closely, Ontario works closely with the Canadian Consular Network in the United States. And we're very fortunate because we work with some very talented, smart people. And I'm smart enough to tap into that and then take credit for their work. So, and how we can help? Well, again, my job is to be helpful. So you contact me anytime for anything. But really what we promote exports from Ontario, and we also help Missouri companies, Missouri stakeholders, because we're in Missouri, so I want to speak specifically about Missouri's relationship with Ontario. My job is to help Missouri stakeholders, companies, navigate Ontario, for whatever reason. So that's a big part of my job. But also it's helping Ontario companies navigate in the U.S., in this case specifically Missouri. There's just a lot of potential in a post-pandemic world to get stuff done and to build on the already deep relationship. And then the last page, that's me, right? And that's next to me is Carson Markley, who's here as well. He's a commercial officer in the Ontario office. Again, Carson does all the work and I take all the credit for it. But I'm excited to be here because this is exactly the kind of job, kind of thing I'm supposed to do. Talk to, go to real schools, talk to real people, and figure out how we can build on the already deep relationship between Missouri and Ontario. So that's it. Did you want me to answer questions or? Stay up here. Okay. I forgot my photos for the 8x10 autograph, so I'm sorry about that.
Emailed them.
Yes.
Thank you, Earl. I kind of sprung that on him yesterday. If you want to learn more, he'll be giving a talk on Thursday, along with Quebec, who will be Zooming in, and he'll share more information. Couple of things before I open it up to questions. I realized as I was talking about the consulate and what we do, I didn't even talk about like my own section of the office because I have that big fancy title, Senior Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Services Officer. So I told you about trade, I told you about consular, but I didn't tell you about our section. So basically, we do advocacy. So we're not helping sell widgets to one another. We're not helping people create these investment opportunities. We're not saving anyone from losing their passport. We're basically the eyes, ears, and mouth of Canada in our 3 states. So you heard my laundry list of files. I have a colleague, also an American, who's focused more on the political side. So we make contacts throughout our 3 states, whether they are federal, state, or local politicians, academic contacts. And we kind of keep our ear to the ground for what is going on in these 3 states that may impact Canada in a positive or a negative way, or where Canada should be taken into consideration. One great example, the files get shifted every once in a while. I get a new diplomat every 4 years, and they like to shift things. And so I was on the Great Lakes file for a number of years. And I was at a Great Lakes meeting, and there were some decisions being made that were just focused on US states. And there was no consideration of Canada, and Canada is the other half of the Great Lakes. We work together and collaboratively on that. So it was up to me to put my hand up and to remind people that Canada was there, but also talk to the folks back at headquarters that are focused on cross-border water issues, let them know what is being talked about, what is going on, what the ultimate goal is, and to get more senior policy people involved to join the conversation so we can work on things collaboratively. So that is exactly why I'm here. Not only as an American, I know Canada is not taught, which is shocking to me now that I have been in this job for so long, but to make sure that people know something about Canada and to understand a little bit about this incredibly important relationship to all of us, as well as building the relationships that we do across our 3 states. So not a great elevator speech, but what we do is unique and kind of hard to explain. Before we go to questions, over on the table where you came in, Earl has his info sheet. I have a specific sheet, Canada, Missouri. It's your state trade fact sheet with infographics and some of those stats on it. We have Canada, US pins. We have Canada, Missouri pins. And then, do you have anything else, Mr. Provo, that I?
Brought candy.
Oh, Earl, I had him cross the border when they were in Michigan last week to get you some of these really great Canadian candies that I might have a problem with. There may be one in my purse right now for later. It's my treat after the second lecture. So, maybe. I was going to go to my thank you slide, but, oh. Anyway, thank you. Merci. There we go. We're on a whole bunch of social that I spend a lot of time doing that, and we would love to take some questions if you have them. Nothing? Thank you. Great. Thank you. And I will take this opportunity to plug that we're doing a whole session tomorrow on studying Canada. So with I've got Quebec zooming in on that as well. So fun fact, there is a Canadian Studies Center in the state of Missouri at University of Missouri at Columbia. It's small but mighty. If you go back to sort of like the 70s, 80s, 90s, there were Canadian studies all over the United States. It's sort of dwindled, and it's more looking at regional studies. So for Canada, the Fulbright program, there's a dedicated Fulbright Canada office, and they have Fulbright opportunities that go all the way down through the undergraduate level, which is fairly unusual for Fulbright. I know that the university here has an exchange program with the University of Prince Edward Island, which is in a lovely part of Canada, just gorgeous up there. It's Prince Edward Island, if you don't know. It's on the east coast. It's the smallest province. A lot of lobster and oysters and potatoes and lighthouses. It's really stunningly gorgeous. So there is an established relationship at this university. There are lots of Canadian, I'll say all Canadian universities are happy to have students from other countries, especially Americans. So applying is the same. You can go up and do a semester. Canada is a great destination for language study. If you want to work on your French, that's where you go. You can immerse and come out fluent. I'll say fluent, not for me. My brain doesn't work like that. There are quite a few opportunities. There are some, last I checked, some funding opportunities through Global Affairs Canada for international students. You are competing with the world, but there's good students everywhere. So there's a really good website called EduCanada, educanada.ca, that kind of goes into all opportunities for international students for Canada. So I'd recommend diving into there. There's just about 100 universities in the country. Colleges and universities means something different in Canada than it does here, and I'll get into that tomorrow. But nearly 100 different programs. A lot of them are very large, comprehensive universities with everything you can think of, and probably more, like Canadian studies, that you wouldn't find necessarily in the United States. So there's lots of opportunities. There's funding opportunities. There's merit-based scholarships. The one thing people ask about is about financial aid. Financial aid programs don't exist for American students to go up, but as I said, good students are good students, and so there's lots of merit-based programs. There's some at the federal level, but there's a lot at the university levels as well. Is there anything you want to jump in on there, Earl? Because Ontario has a tremendous number of schools.
Part of my mandate is to build relationships between U.S. schools and Ontario schools, peer appropriate relationships, creating strategic partnership agreements between Ontario universities and colleges and schools in my territory. So certainly, I want to pursue opportunities with Missouri schools and Ontario schools. It's just like an MOU. It's an aspirational document, not legally binding, but it does. The Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has said to me quite often, and says quite often in far more colorful language than I'm going to share now, things get done when people know each other. So building these relationships, getting academic institutions to do partnerships with Ontario academic institutions is a big part of that. And, when you do all that, the economic opportunity is going to follow. It's always about economic opportunity. It's always about jobs. And if Missouri students, MSSU students go to Ontario and build relationships with Ontario students, Ontario stakeholders, Ontario schools, there's no limit to what we can achieve and what we can do as a province and a state and between institutions. So it's all a slow process. Working with the Canadian government, there are other opportunities, but my perspective, my role is to build these strategic partnerships between academic institutions in Ontario, in this case, Missouri. So lots of potential there, and I'm very confident that in 2025 we'll get a lot of that done.
Sounds like you two should talk. So, good. Any other questions? Try to keep this on time. Once, twice. You're done with us. Thank you.